Just going to take a moment here to make sure that I'm good to go. This is my first time using a multi-streaming service, so I just want to quickly make sure that we're good to go. And it looks like I am, so just check one more thing. And yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, seems like we're good. So I'm just going to get started. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But this will be somewhat of a short one anyway, since it's mostly a test. But here's what I'm going to be doing in this video. I'm just going to talk about 4 common questions that I get when I'm talking to beginner web developers. And this is mostly like super early beginners, people that might not have even started yet, that just have questions. And then 1 or 2 of these might be applicable to people who have already been doing it for a year or 2. So stick around. But let's just try to make this smooth really quick. I just want to, I don't know if I'll be able to see anything in the chat, but it's my first time using this particular service, so. All right, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and start talking about the first question. Now, these are not gonna be in order. I'm actually just going to talk about them in the order that I feel like is most important. So let's start with the first one. Should I learn programming / how long does it take to learn programming? Now, this is actually kind of interesting because it sort of depends, right? How much expertise do you already have in technology, and have you any experience whatsoever with the concept of programming? Are you completely new to computers? These are the sorts of things you need to take into account. Now, I'll give you some estimations of my own experience, and then we can look at some data here on the internet in just a second. So let's start by just talking about my own personal experience. Now, saying how long does it take to learn programming is a little bit complicated because it's like, when do you know programming? At what is the threshold? Well, for me, it's when you can sit down and write a program that you've thought of without, like, all by yourself. And yes, you're still going to have to Google it. Yes, you're still going to have to look for potentially like tutorials and that sort of thing, but you're able to think of something and then build it out. That's when, in my opinion, you've learned programming, quote unquote. So how long does it take to get there? Well, sorry, I'm multitasking at the moment. There we go. So I would say that if you're learning web development, there's several things you have to learn, right? You have to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript. HTML, you can really kind of learn that in like 2 or 3 days. Now, you're not going to master it in 2 or 3 days. It's going to take you a long time. But it's going to, you can get the basics of it to where you can write your own HTML and understand what you're doing in 2 or 3 days. You probably do it in a single day if you already have a little bit of experience. CSS is a little bit more complicated. I would say give that one anywhere between a week and a month, depending on your experience. So now we're already at about a month time. JavaScript is where it gets substantially more difficult. See, if you are trying to learn JavaScript for the first time and you've never learned a programming language before, I would say it could potentially take a year or more, but I have seen people learn it and become somewhat competent in it in less than that, anywhere from 4 to 6 months, and those people tend to be pretty gifted. So I would say on average, expect to learn the core language of JavaScript. Sure, you can learn it in a couple weeks to a month or maybe 2 months, but learning how to apply it and learning all of the different libraries associated with JavaScript and how to do the stuff that people actually want to do with JavaScript, that is where it takes a long time. And then especially starting to learn the more intermediate stuff like scope, how scope works in JavaScript, and then, things like closures and that sort of thing, the functions of the array object, all those good things that everybody eventually needs to understand. it really takes a lot of time. So I would say, let's just say about a year on average. So now we're looking at about a year to 18 months. So 12 to 18 months to go from absolutely no experience whatsoever to being able to understand how to program using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Now, that is my opinion. Let's look at some data. So I've got this incognito window open and I'm just gonna start Googling some stuff and we're gonna talk about this along the way. Also, we have, I just recently opened the chat. So I see, it says Piece 8D, someone was responding, whichever has more jobs in your area. Good to see you again live. I mean, yes, same to you. And Dario says, what do you think of post CSS? And I'll get to your guys' questions towards the end, okay? After I answer these 4 main ones, we'll get to questions in the chat and anything that gets tweeted as well. Cool. So how long does it take to learn JavaScript? I want to get other people's opinions on this as well. So someone said 6 to 9 months. Zoom in a little bit. This is Jack's Enter. I don't know what this is. This is just something that popped up on Google, so it could just be someone else's opinion, but I want to get a few other people's opinions as well. This says most programmers will say that it will take at least 6 to 9 months to learn basic JavaScript and really be comfortable with it. Even then, you will spend years gaining new skills and a deeper understanding of JavaScript, as well as many of the hundreds of other programming languages. That is about what I was thinking, but I was thinking like, okay, 6 to 9 months to really understand the basics of JavaScript, sure. If you spend more time, I think it could be more like 2 to 3 months. If you have a full-time job and or you're in school for something else and you don't have time to focus on it like every single day for hours, then yeah, it could take 6 to 9 months to get the basics down. But I think if you put full-time learning in, you could probably get it in 2 to 3. But the year mark, the reason why I said a year is because I'm talking about getting into that intermediate level where you're starting to understand things like closures and scope and that sort of thing. And that's when you start to get comfortable enough without having to Google and copy and paste code snippets every 5 seconds, which you don't want to do. Because then you don't understand the code that's in your code base. And then if you find a bug, you don't even know how to fix it, etc. So I would say a year. I'm still not convinced by the 6 to 9 months. Maybe to learn basic JavaScript. I guess I can see that. Can I learn JavaScript in a month? While JavaScript is a step up from the most fundamental web development skills like HTML and CSS, which can be learned in under a month, which I said as well, I believe that you can learn those pretty quickly. You can still expect to learn JavaScript basics in a matter of months, not years. And that's whether you learn through online classes or teach yourself through book study. That is more along the lines of what I think as well. So basic JavaScript in a matter of months. Sure, I agree with that. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it looks like about, depending on how much time you put into it, you could probably learn everything you need to know to be a web developer in a year or so. But there's still the entire ecosystem of programming that you still have to learn, which is going to take years to get the hang of. So you would be a junior developer for sure, and you'd be asking questions nonstop. Likely you wouldn't know what you're doing and you'd be uncomfortable. So I would say, like me personally, I programmed for 3 years or more before I actually got my first job. And even then I was still like, wow, this is overwhelming. So realistically, and I don't want to discourage anyone, it's very unlikely that you're going to just start learning programming and then within a year have a job. Maybe not even within 2 years. I mean, it's possible, but I would say think of it of a kind of like a long-term goal of 3 years. At least get that in your head. If you can do it sooner than that, awesome. Now that's just JavaScript. Python, I learned Python in probably a month or so. Obviously not the more advanced stuff, but Python, it's harder to know what to do with Python when you're a beginner than it is to do with JavaScript because everybody uses websites, right? Everybody uses the internet. So you are constantly interacting with JavaScript. So you have an idea in your head, subconsciously at least, of how to apply JavaScript. Not so much with with Python. Python, it can be a little bit more confusing if you've never done like Linuxy stuff or system stuff, unless you're building games or GUIs or something like that. But for the most part, Python is great for learning how to program. It's also a great programming language in general, but if you're a beginner, I always recommend Python in the beginning just to learn the basics of how to program in general. And then once you understand the core language of like for loops and how to assign variables and what the concept of programming is in general, that's when I would say go ahead and start to figure out which area of programming you're into. Is it game development? Is it web development? And then once you have that idea in your head and you're like, okay, I understand the basics of programming, and now I kind of know what it is I want to do, that's when you should dig into the language of your industry, such as JavaScript or C# or whatever. That's the second half of this question. The first half is, should I learn programming, which is a different question, but similar. And I would say everybody should at least learn a little bit. And I was talking to a buddy recently who just said he was going to start learning programming. He might be watching this. I don't know. Shout out to Chris. But he's going to start learning Python. And he doesn't have any experience whatsoever with programming at all. And over the years, we've been going back and forth on me telling him, hey, look, I think you should learn programming because I think he has the right mind for it, etc. But he never got around to it. And when I had this discussion with him, I realized like what I would consider to be the threshold of how far at least everybody should try to get before they determine whether or not programming is for them. I think, personally, you should get to the point where you understand the language enough, any language that you learn. Again, I'm recommending Python, but it can be anything. Get to the point where you can write a very simple program that calculates the mean, median, and mode of a set of numbers. Just get that far. I think that you could get to that point within 6 months. Just get to that point. And then at that point, I guarantee you are going to know whether or not you are interested in programming as a career or not. Now, I will admit it's a little bit difficult to get to that point. And the reason why I recommend everybody at least try that is because even if you don't want to learn programming as a job, if you don't want to become an engineer, obviously software engineering and programming in general is becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, it's just going to take over. I mean, it's not going to be the only job opportunity out there, but it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be the next big thing. And I highly recommend everybody at least have a little bit of it in their tool belt, or whatever you want to call it, so that they can at least comprehend what is going on in the world, at least a little bit. And if you're not, that's fine, but it's just what I recommend. But yeah, anyway, if you get to that point where you can calculate the mean, median, and mode of a set of numbers, you'll know whether or not it's for you. And I would say everybody should at least try it. So I think that's that for this question. I'm going to move it down. Now I'm going to look at the chat. We have a new question that says tips for getting interviews. I have applied pretty much everywhere. Nobody is responding. Stick around. I will answer your questions very soon. I'm going to get through these other three really quick, and then at the end, I'm going to answer your guys' questions here. So I'm going to go through them fast. Don't worry. So the next thing is what language to learn. I want to do this one now. I already said Python, but that's if you're just trying to learn programming. Again, it really depends on what it is you're trying to do in your career. But I would say if you're just trying to learn programming, start with Python. It's the in my opinion, the absolute best language to learn how to program because it's extremely simple. It teaches you very basic things like without too much overhead or learning curve, because really Python is designed to be a very simple, very basic, easy to understand programming language, but it's also extremely powerful, and that's the key, right? It can do so much. So it's like learning Python has the benefit of it being easy to understand, but it also has the benefit of actually being an insanely powerful, very good programming language to use throughout the rest of your career. And likely, even if you do go into another area of programming, such as JavaScript or game development, C#, any of that, it's very likely you're going to encounter Python throughout your career. So it's like, why not just learn that as your first language? It's a great stepping stone into the industry as a whole. And yeah, I mean, just like that is my recommendation. Another, if you don't want to learn Python, another good one is Ruby, but I don't really recommend Ruby personally because it's so different from other programming languages that it's going to be harder to translate your learning, like what you're learning through Ruby, into other things such as C or JavaScript or C Sharp or anything like that, Java. It's a different type of language. Now, it's a really helpful, very useful language, especially if you're doing things in web development, such as like Ruby on Rails, although probably that's becoming more of an older technology nowadays, but it's still an easy to understand, pretty powerful language. So that could be recommended by some people. A lot of people say C and C++ are a good first language, but I'm just going to be real. No. I mean, it can be, but there's a lot of computer science topics and concepts that you would learn throughout the process of learning C and C++, which is great if you have the time and the resources to learn something like that. But most people don't, and most people want to just be able to start doing stuff as soon as possible so that they can understand what they're doing and determine whether or not they enjoy it. So that's, again, where I would say Python is the way to go. So what language to learn? My heavy recommendation is Python. So I'm going to move that down and move on to the next question. These are the two remaining. So getting a job, I'm going to answer last. It looks like I've got some more questions in the chat around getting a job, which maybe I'll answer you guys' questions in that section. So I'll do that one last. And then anything left over we will do in the Q&A right after this. So tech stacks. I just put this one in here. Everybody in web development is all about tech stacks like Mern, Mean, Maven, other ones too. So for example, Mean being MEAN. I'll type it out. Why not? Like Mean stack. This would be MongoDB, Express.js, Angular, and Node.js, or the Mern stack, which is the same thing, but instead of Angular, it's React, and Maven, which is Vue, and etc. I'm not a huge fan of stacks, and I think a lot of people that follow me are aware of that. I think it's a good thing to understand a stack if you're trying to get into web development early on, because what a stack essentially is a set of separate technologies that are really not really related to each other directly, but go really, really well together. For example, React, you can use with anything. You can use React with anything. If we talk about the Mern stack, we don't have to use it with Express.js or Node or Mongo. Obviously, Express and Node.js are tied together. So honestly, like I don't even know why Express and it should just be MRN, because Express is just a Node.js framework. But whatever. Maybe I'm wrong about what the Mean stack is, but I'm pretty sure it's Express, right? Mean stack, if we look at it. Yeah. The N is Node, right? Pretty sure. Yeah. So it's just weird, right? So even right in the beginning, it's sort of like contradictory because Express.js is Node.js. So it's a library of Node.js. So I don't know. And it's confusing to people who are just starting to begin, right? Because they see these things and they think, okay, well, what stack do you use? And it's like, well, I use every stack. I use whatever makes sense at the time. I might switch things. I might go from Mern and then realize that the R in Mern is not as good as the A in Mean, and then I might switch them out or use both. Sometimes I do both in the same app. And I don't know. I think you should learn each of these technologies individually. Learn MongoDB separate from all of the other technologies in a Mean stack or Mern stack. Just learn MongoDB. Learn Express.js along with Node. Learn React, learn Angular, learn Vue, learn these things separately, and then learn when to apply each one. For example, if I'm building a application and I want to get it bootstrapped really quickly and I just want to, build this app as fast as possible as a prototype or just get it up off the ground as soon as possible, I will almost always go with React because to me, it's what I'm most familiar with, and I think it's easiest to get up and going with it. Although a lot of people would say their version of React is Vue, like because it's so lightweight, it's super easy to get started with it. The point is, learning a single stack and just like being religious about it to me is it's counterproductive, and I think it's bad as a way for beginners to get started on learning programming. I think you should learn them individually and then learn when to apply each one. And then if someone asks you what your preferred stack is, you can say, well, I prefer to use Mern, but and then you can have that conversation at that point. But I just see stacks being overhyped as like a thing that you go learn, but it's really an ecosystem. All right, sweet. That was my rant on tech stacks. Let's talk about getting a job, the juicy stuff. So this is where things get interesting, right? Because earlier I was talking about how long does it take to learn programming. So let's just say it takes 2 years for you to go from zero to being comfortable enough to be a junior developer. Let's say 2 years. Now you're at this point where you're like, okay, I feel like I'm ready to get a job. What do I do now? I don't have college, or maybe you do. What do I do now? So there's several things that you are going to want to have at this point. You're going to want to have a GitHub, obviously, where you have the your code that you've written so that potential employers can go see the code that you write. You're going to want to have that. You are going to want to have a website like in front of me. I have a very simple website, but it's like that on purpose, where I just write basic like blog posts about how scope works in JavaScript and that sort of thing, and links to my stuff here. I mean, it's simple, but if an employer were to see this, if I were applying for jobs, they would see this and they would see the ways that I think and some of my expertise, and then they can go to my YouTube and see that I make videos and then blah, blah, blah. Have a home base for your content, aka a website, but also make sure that you built your website and you're not using WordPress or something like that, because that's a red flag, I think, unless you're applying for a WordPress position or something like that. So that's GitHub and a website. Have a LinkedIn. You don't have, that's not mandatory. GitHub and a website kind of are, but LinkedIn isn't really mandatory, but I recommend it because it's sort of like an online place for employers to not only see your resume and your experience and your connections and the way you interact with people professionally, but also for people to find you, because it also has that search engine element to it where people can then find you. And it can get a little annoying when you're contacted by recruiters all day, but you can just ignore them. So it's not really that big of a burden. And plus, maybe you find the right recruiter that hooks you up with a great job. I mean, that's happened to me before. So LinkedIn, GitHub, website. Now, you also are going to want to have, this is one of the most important ones and probably one of the most difficult ones when you're first starting off, is references. Now, the way that I got my first reference, his name was Zach, ironically, Zachary Saunders. I don't want to give too much information away, but we worked on an app together that was just open source. I think I posted a free app that I had built on Reddit, and he saw it and was like, hey, do you want to work on this together? And I said, sure. And we worked together back and forth. We just kind of built features out. We worked together. He showed me a lot of interesting things like Slack integrations. This was back before that was super popular. So it was like super new to me. And he was teaching me things that I didn't know, and I was teaching him things that he didn't know. And we learned together and grew together. And then eventually I went on to put in an application, and I used him as a reference, and he gave me a great, whatever you want to call it. He talked great about me, and it helped me get the job. So having a reference is super important. The way that you get the references when you don't have any professional experience is going to be on you to think creatively to figure out how you can get these references, but work together. I mean, get on places like Reddit, meet other people in the chat here. You know, in the chat, you can be like, hey guys, you want to start a project? Go for it. You know, you get a community going of people where you're all coding together. And when it comes time, you will have connections with these people now. There's no other way to get these professional connections than to go and reach out to people, unless you're in college or something like that. Then they're kind of handed to you, but or a coding boot camp. But if you're trying to teach yourself, you need to go and find these opportunities yourself. So, a reference. That's the fourth one, I think. Then there is the coding interview process, which is like, it varies so much. If you're going to a FANG company, you're probably going to be doing a bunch of data structure questions and algorithms and horrible nightmare whiteboarding stuff. If you are going to a startup that's not part of that, odds are what's going to happen is you're going to be asked about your basic knowledge of programming. You're going to be given some basic questions. You'll probably have to write a few functions that do some basic things. And then you might be given like a 3-hour working session where they leave you and then you code up some components or something and then they come back to you. I've seen that pretty much every time I've interviewed. It's pretty much been like that. The most uncomfortable aspect of that is when you're coding while they're watching. And I have found that when I am being watched, my coding skills drop insanely. So they'll say, "Can you remove duplicates from an array?" And instantly I'm just like, "Oh God, I don't know how to do that right now," even though it's super easy to do. It becomes super difficult to do basic stuff when you're being watched with that pressure on you. So practice. Just get someone you know. I don't know, your parent or your brother or just a friend. If you have anybody that you can reach out to, just say, "Hey, like, this is what I'm going to do. Can you watch me?" And just get used to someone watching you code. I know that sounds weird, but try it. It's going to make it harder, and you want to get used to that. Then for the algorithm stuff, I recommend not Codecademy, Code Wars or LeetCode. Do coding challenges. There is also like Algo Expert. If you want to pay, go for that. Don't really recommend Algo Expert unless you are applying for, a FANG company or a job that just in general is going to expect you to understand data structure stuff. Instead, I would just recommend you do basic coding challenges on like Code Wars and LeetCode, that sort of thing. But sorry, had to get some water there. So that's pretty much and make sure you have like a resume. If you don't have any experience whatsoever, they're going to look at your resume and be like, why should we take this person over this person that has experience? So like, you're going to kind of want to make sure that you have some sort of experience on your resume. So build stuff, build a small portfolio, reach out to restaurants and work for free. I know that's controversial, right? Working for free. Oh no. What's wrong with that? I mean, you've already been coding for free for 2 years, learning how to code, right? Why not continue that? Go somewhere to a local company and be like, "Hey, I will code your website for free if you'll just let me do it." And then do it. And now you have an actual website that you can show employers to be like, "Hey, look, I built this. This is live in production." I mean, come on. Why not? So that is going to be it for these questions. I'm going to go straight to answering your guys' chat questions. Okay, so we have a few. Let's look here. I want to answer them in the order in which they came. Unfortunately, the very first question, it looks like I didn't get in time. It's not showing up on my chat, so I can't see it. So I'm going to have to go to the next one. If Mr. DC, if you're still here, if you want to re-ask your question, I'll make sure I get to it. What do I think about Post CSS? Let's look at this. So a tool for transforming CSS with JavaScript. By the way, I use, I'm trying to understand what you mean by Post CSS. Add vendor prefixes to CSS rules using values from can I use. Auto prefixer will use the data based on current browser popularity and property support to apply prefixes for you. Okay, I got you. So it's sort of like a compilation tool that, oh man, I always feel like these never do a very good job of explaining explaining what they are. Okay, it says PostCSS is a tool for transforming styles with JS plugins. So it is a compilation tool. I probably use it. It's probably built into like Create React app or React scripts or something. I bet it is. What do I think about it? I can't tell you because honestly, I write vanilla CSS and I always have. Now, I use CSS modules with React because I like the way that it kind of takes the class name and adds a unique ID to it and scopes it to the current component you're on. So if you have a main class on one component, it doesn't conflict with a main class on another component. And I also like the fact that you can add the class names as object properties. So that's CSS modules, but obviously it's not the same as this. I can't really answer your question on this. I apologize, but I might get more deeply into this and just kind of like hopefully answer your question in the future. Next question is tips for getting interviews. I have applied pretty much everywhere. Nobody is responding. Okay, well, it's hard to say because I don't know what your resume looks like. I don't know what your experience looks like. But oftentimes, if you're applying to places and you're not getting responses, it can be one of two things. One, that isn't their main medium for finding employees. A lot of the times they'll have like a hold on, sorry. Someone popped up in the chat and said hello, Lumjacker. How are you doing? So there is they may have a different medium for accepting applications, but they may still just have like this thing on their website where you can apply, but they never check it. Instead, they rely on recruiters on LinkedIn or something like that. So really what you should be doing is applying through their preferred medium. You might have to do a little bit of research for the company to figure out where they are accepting applications or where they're looking most often. And sometimes they're really just only looking by recommendations within their already employed employees. So sometimes they only just like they have a stack of applications that they never look at because they're always just getting recommendations from their employees already. So sometimes you have to kind of take that extra step and figure out how to get in contact with these companies. The other thing is they may see your resume and they may just not see anything on there that interests them. So again, that really just comes back to, do you have experience on your resume? Do you stand out in any way? Or are you just like, you just put like, I have a college degree and I'm super passionate about programming and like, is that it? Or do you have like a portfolio where they can click on and be like, wow, this guy builds, or girl or whoever builds awesome websites, or apps or whatever you're building, games. This person is an exceptional programmer. If not, then it's really hard for companies to justify reaching back out. So again, I don't really know what your resume looks like. I'd love to take a look. If you want to send it to me, reach out to me on Twitter and I'll take a look at your resume and I'll actually give you tips if you want me to, for sure. All right, so the next one. What is the best resource to get remote jobs or freelance work? Well, right now, we're kind of like getting out of this whole COVID thing, right? But during the peak of this whole COVID situation, everybody pretty much was working remote. Now companies are starting to go back into the office, but a lot of them aren't. Remote work is way more common than it was a year and a half ago. So tips on getting remote jobs. Well, I would say 80% of the programming jobs I've gotten have been remote. Just look on job boards for remote jobs. I mean, it's really not harder to find remote work than it is to find office work nowadays. I think it's the same, but you're going to want to make sure that you're familiar with the tools of working remote. Zoom, Slack, Atlassian tools, etc. So just make sure you have a fundamental understanding of how all that works and then just apply to remote jobs. I mean, like I said, I really truly believe it's just as easy to find a remote job today in programming as it is to find one in the office. It might even be easier. Next question. Also, I'll bring the chat over here. You might not. Yeah, I'll just bring the chat over here so you can see what I'm looking at. Okay. Can we have a video on creating a design system on React and then make a full-fledged project using it? That sounds awesome. I want to do that. We could use Storybook. By the way, I don't know if you can see, wearing my Storybook shirt. We can use Storybook and potentially Rollup to build it out, build a design system, and then build a project using that design system. That sounds awesome. I appreciate that that recommendation, Piece 8D. I might actually do that, so keep an eye out. What software do I use to record your videos? So typically I use OBS or Streamlabs OBS. Now, for the first time ever, I'm using Restream to stream on both Twitch and Facebook and YouTube simultaneously. I have no idea what that is going to look like. It's my first time using it, so hopefully it looks good. If it does, I'll continue using it. Might go premium, who knows. When should I learn Next? I'm assuming you're talking about Next.js. Next.js is... I love Next.js, but not everybody needs to use Next.js. And I feel like that is... like everybody's talking about Next.js as this, like it's replacing React or something, or it's just this mandatory tool, or that it does things that it really doesn't. Next.js is a framework that is a React framework that handles some amazing things for you right out of the box, like server-side rendering and static site generation and some other awesome things. It is an open source framework that is built on React that basically makes a lot of things a lot easier. Now, if you don't need those things like server-side rendering and static site generation, I would highly recommend you do not use Next.js. It's just there's no reason to. So when should you learn Next.js? The second you need to, and you'll know. Okay, so this says, also would love a video on making an intermediate Chrome extension using React. I've been struggling trying to do that since a few days. So I've built, I think 2 Chrome extensions in the past, but I didn't know you could do it with React anymore. It's been a long time since I've built these out. I think I just can't remember what I did. It was just like some basic JSON and a little bit of JavaScript. So yeah, I'd love to look back on that. You're giving some good ideas, Piece 8D. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I would do a Google Chrome plugin extension or whatever you want to call it using React if that's something you can do. How important is it to learn SEO while still learning code? It depends on what you're doing. Are you building a website where you're going to have a landing page where you're going to want good searchability? Or are you just building an app for a company that's internal? It depends on what you're doing, because SEO is, again, one of those techniques that are applied in certain situations. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to use it. But yeah, if you're building websites that are going to be public facing where you want good searchability, I would just learn SEO while you're still learning code for sure, because it's really not that complicated. SEO is like, I mean, it's simple stuff. I mean, it takes effort to try and get to the very top of Google or something like that for broad search terms. But if you're doing something specific in a niche, it's pretty easy to be the first result if there aren't very many people that do what you do, if you understand the basics of SEO. So yeah, I think it's an important tool to understand. So do I recommend Python or JavaScript for code challenges / interview questions? Either one. If you are learning programming and you don't know what it is you want to do yet, probably just learn Python. If you know for a fact you want to be a web developer and that is what you're doing, that's the job interviews you're going for, do JavaScript. A lot of pseudocode, though, ends up looking like Python. But again, if you're interviewing for web development jobs, you will definitely want to be doing your coding challenges in JavaScript. Front end or back end or full stack, which one can get someone a job sooner? Ooh, well, I think that it's kind of funny. Being a front end engineer, you're probably still going to be doing DevOps and you're probably going to still be doing back end. So you're probably going to be a full stack engineer, just with a huge emphasis on the front end. Same with the back end. If you're a back end engineer, you're basically going to be a full stack engineer, but with a massive emphasis on just the back end. Full stack engineer, you tend to have the whole gambit is your full responsibility. I don't really recommend. I don't think that these things correlate that much. Like which one would get you a job sooner? I think it's all the same for how soon you would get a job, except for the fact that if you are a full stack engineer, it would take you longer to get to the skill level, I guess you could say, because you have to get good at both the front end and the back end. So I would say maybe start with front end and then also play around with the back end. If you like both, then learn them both and then become a full stack engineer. But it's kind of hard. I don't think these things correlate as much as you might think they do. How long does it take to be a professional full stack developer? Well, like I was saying earlier, to learn JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, it probably takes anywhere between 1 and 2 years to get to the point where you're comfortable with the language and you understand the intermediate level of things like scope and closures and all that. But once you understand JavaScript, you can write Node.js code as well, which is backend. So you'd have to learn Node.js and how all that works. But that wouldn't be nearly as difficult as actually learning how to code in JavaScript. So let's just say it takes 2 years to get down all of the languagey stuff. Well, on the side, you can also be learning Node.js because you can be applying these concepts in Node.js. It wouldn't add that much time to it, maybe a maximum of like 6 months or something like that. I don't know. So let's say within 3 years, but it could be less than a year if you're really good. Just not very likely. So maybe 3 years, 3 to 4 years. I would definitely say maybe try front end or back end first, and then while you're doing a back end or front end job, try applying yourself in the other side as well, and then eventually just call yourself a full stack developer once you're comfortable with both, and try to do both at your job, and then eventually move on to a official full stack position. All right. What's the next question here? Haha, thanks for the consideration. The storybook shirt looks amazing. Have been trying to up my skills and design system seemed really interesting, not to bulk up a component with multiple props. Yes, so I am probably going to be doing that. By the way, these are lessons I look up from the Airbnb People's Design System talk. Yeah, the people at Airbnb are brilliant, and they create awesome tools as well. As an intermediate React developer, what should we know about React? I think I understand what you're asking. Good question. I haven't really thought about React in an intermediate way, like what separates a beginner from an intermediate level Reactist. But I would say this video right here that's in front of you on my website does a pretty good job of explaining how a React app works. Now, again, like I get a lot of comments on this video that's like, oh, I was expecting how React itself, the library works, the diffing algorithm and stuff like that. To be clear, what I meant by this video is how a React application works under the hood. So the ecosystem of a React application, how all the different tools come together to create a React application. And I highly recommend you watch that video, because if you understand all of the concepts that I go through in this, then you're pretty much at that intermediate React level. If you don't, then now you know what to research, right? So highly recommend you check that video out, and it will give you a really good idea of what you need to understand. Can you guide us how we can fetch real-time API data using Next.js? I think I have actually done that a few times. But it depends on what you mean by real-time API data. Do you mean like WebSockets? like a polling system, or I'm not sure what you mean by real-time API data. I mean, I've done several Next.js tutorials where you get data from an API in real time, but I don't know what you mean by that. So maybe if you want to clarify, I can answer that for you. My website is live. Could you take a look and give some feedback? You can even review my resume. You can view it on my portfolio website. Well, what is your website? I'll look at it right now. If you're comfortable with me looking at it on the live stream, I will look at it right now if you want to post it in the chat. If for some reason the chat blocks it, send it to me on Twitter. I'll look at it right now. I'll put up Twitter in a window over here and keep an eye out on it to see if you send me a message. Okay, in the meantime, next question. You are the who make me love learning Next.js. Well, I appreciate that. I think Next.js is an amazing tool, and if you need to apply it, it is possibly one of the biggest godsends of of the programming universe. That's how greatly I feel about Next.js, but you have to make sure that you're using it intentionally and you're not just using it because it's a hype thing that's going on right now. What would you prefer, just PWAs or integrating with Ionic? I am confused. Okay, so two different things there, right? Ionic is going to be a way to turn a Angular app into a mobile app, right? And a progressive web app would essentially allow your web page to potentially end up getting installed as a pretend app. I'm putting this in quotes because really what it is it's not an app. It's just your website inside of, in a way that looks like an app that the operating system supports. Highly recommend native if possible, but a lot of the times people can't do that because they have to learn a separate language. So the next option would be something like Ionic or React Native. I'd recommend that because then you can compile it to a native app. Still, native is better performance and just overall people prefer that. And then if you can't do either of those, do a progressive web application. I recommend a PWA regardless because there's other benefits as well. Let's see. Then someone said, oh, they said they would post up the website. I don't see the link to the website, so I don't know if YouTube is blocking URLs in the chat, but if so, just go ahead and send it to me on Twitter, or maybe I can quickly jump over to the actual YouTube chat and see if I can locate it. Make sure I mute myself. Yeah, I don't see your website in the chat. So, okay, next. Oh, you'll send it on Instagram. Can I log into Instagram on here? I don't want to take too long on this. Let's see if I can get on to Instagram really quick. I just recommend you type out the website URL into the chat, maybe put some dots or spaces, and then I'll just copy it over into my URL. So the next question is, I've heard people put a big emphasis on Git/GitHub and just version control in general. I struggle with how often to commit messages that would be considered good by others. Any advice? So Git is an important tool. Obviously, everybody pretty much is going to use Git as their version control system. Some people use SVN, but that is like on its way out, and not that many people use it. So Git is an extremely important tool. You kind of have to know it if you're going to be a web developer. Now, how often to commit? Think about like this. Let's say you want to create a feature. I would create a new branch with the feature name, write all the code for the feature, including the tests, and then commit that feature and then merge that into master. Now, how many times you commit to that particular branch with messages is totally up to you. You can commit every time you write a new line of code. That won't matter. That's totally up to you, but I highly recommend you create branches and then merge into master. So for a feature or a bug fix, that sort of thing. If it's a huge feature, then I recommend you break that into smaller branches and then do it like that, and then merge the smaller branches into a bigger feature branch that then gets merged into master or main. But that is my recommendation for you. You sent the link on Instagram. Well, I'll see what I can do about that really quick. I don't want to spend too much time on it because, let me see. I'm logging into my Instagram right now. While I'm logging into that, oh, there it is. Wait. Come on. Okay, gotcha. I'm opening up your website right now. Let me know if in the chat if it's okay if I show your website on the stream. In the meantime, I'm going to answer the next question, okay? So the next question is, what is a content developer job? I didn't get the job, but it asks me if I have some library science background. Company didn't say much about it. I don't know what library science is. Like, I have literally no idea what library science is, so I apologize. Content developer, that might be like writing blog posts and that sort of thing, or tutorials, or even like documentation. But I've never heard of that either, so I can't really answer your question. I really don't know what library science is, but it sounds very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to quickly show this website here. I'm going to see if I can get it over here. There we go. So this VB, right? I can call you VB. This is VB's website. Now, oh, like Mad Candy says, like to learn to be a library. Yeah, now that would be a great job. I would love to be a library. So this is VB's website. I want to take a quick look at it and just see like what is my opinion of their website. So we have about me. Well, actually, before I do any of this, let me just start by saying this is kind of cool. Like I instantly am kind of interested in what's going to happen if I click this button. Well, I'm not going to click it yet. I like that it has a nice little intro. You're using, I think this is an SVG potentially. Let's look. This is a SVG. So instantly I'm like, okay, it uses SVGs. Not bad. The website looks good. I don't really like this part up here. I would say maybe put your actual name there or something. I don't know. I wouldn't recommend this too much. It kind of looks a little weird. If I click about me, where does it go? Let's see. It's a little slow. I don't know. Oh, you're hosting it on Netlify. You must be on the free tier or something. I don't know. It's a little slow. So that's something that would I would pay attention to. So I click the portfolio. Feel free to browse through my projects. Okay, it's loading your projects. It's a little slow again. So loving the look of everything, but the slowness is a little bothersome. To do app React. What happens when I click this? Doesn't look like anything happens. So I would definitely want to be able to like click this and then either take me to the source code where I can clone the project or to a place where it's already hosted. Maybe I'm getting errors every time I click this. Whoops. Let me see. Yeah, I'm not getting any errors that I can see. Oh, and it looks like you're logging things. I would get rid of your logs. And these should be clickable. Contact. Cool. Yeah, I like this. Resume. What happens? Oh, it downloads a PDF. Okay, that I shouldn't have opened. But I closed it really quick. But yeah, I mean, I guess it really doesn't matter. Anybody knows your website now, so they can probably find it. So it's not private information at this point. Hopefully, somebody sees this that's looking for a developer and hires VB, who I think is actually building a pretty cool little website here. What happens when I click this? Oh, okay. So it just scrolls you down a little bit. I was hoping. What happens if I click no? Ah. I think it'd be funny if I clicked no and just a big frowny face appears with like a crying, like a tear or something. Or maybe it just plays like Rick Astley, Never Gonna Give You Up. And then if I click yes, it should just like download the resume, or I don't know. I think if I click yes, it should take me here. Yeah, I like that. So overall, I'm digging it. It needs a little bit of work, but yeah. Next up here. Okay, so for a basic e-commerce system, is Firebase good for backend services, or should I consider other resources? I love Firebase. Use it if you can, because it's got a very generous free tier. It does a lot of really powerful stuff. Highly recommend it. It's also got integrations and libraries, support for like every major framework. So highly recommend Firebase if you can use it. If you need a more customized backend, you're probably going to have to build your own, like through Next.js or AWS or something like that. But for a basic e-commerce system, you'll likely be okay with that. Also, check out Vercel and Next.js. They have some integrations too. Thanks for answering my question. Library science involves categorizing and cataloging lots of content. It was for one of the FANG companies. So is that kind of like data science, but in specifically organizing it? Because I know data science is a lot of mining and like trying to find patterns in data, but maybe library science is like indexing the data. I think that's kind of interesting. Hi, explain recursion in simple language. Okay, this is probably going to be my last one before I get off here. Recursion in simple language is just a function that calls itself. I mean, that is it. Now, if a function and the function is designed to only call itself, then it's going to infinitely call itself forever. That's bad. So what you have to do is write conditional logic in your function that determines whether or not it should then either call itself again or return the information that you are wanting. So it's really hard to explain recursion. There was this tweet that I saw. I want to see if I can find it really quick. Twitter, explain recursion. Eli 5, explain it like I'm 5. There was like this tweet I saw where people were explaining recursion in one sentence or something like that. And it was pretty brilliant. I saw some good explanations in there. But yeah, I can't find it right now. All right, well, I think that's going to be it. And thanks everyone for showing up. I'm going to figure out how to stop this stream. I think I just pressed the sent it to my Twitter. All right, well, I'll check that out. I'll be streaming again, so I might get to it on the next go round.